On May 10th, Hermes Agent processed 224 billion tokens in a single day on OpenRouter versus OpenClaw's 186 billion. That was the first time since OpenClaw launched in late 2025 that anything has taken the daily lead from it. And Hermes did it in about 90 days from launch. And when you look at what actually drove this flip, it tells a pretty clear story about where this whole category of AI agent is heading. You already know about the context loss problem, right? You've built workarounds for it, CloudMD files, memory directories, markdown brain systems, and it can work, but it's manual overhead that you still have to maintain yourself. There was one developer who documented 59 context resets across 26 days of Claude code use before he built his own persistence layer. Now that's the wall OpenClaw and Hermes are both trying to eliminate, and they're doing it from completely different angles. Now OpenClaw. The messaging integrations we know are genuinely its strongest suit, right? But the thing worth being honest about is the security issue, because it's gotten pretty serious. And in a 4-day window in March, 9 CVEs were disclosed against OpenClaw, one scoring 9.9 out of 10 on the severity scale. And security researchers have found 341 malicious skills in a single Claw Hub audit. 335 of them tied to one coordinated campaign that was stealing cryptocurrency wallets and browser credentials. Cisco called it an absolute nightmare. Gartner issued a formal warning against OpenClaw, calling it an unacceptable cybersecurity risk to enterprises. And it told companies immediately, you need to block downloads, you need to rotate any corporate credentials the agent is touched. China restricted state-owned enterprises and banks from running it on their office computers. And then Belgium and South Korea, they both issued government advisories. And then there's the consent story, which has really gotten a lot of people's attention. There was a student in California who discovered that his OpenClaw agent had autonomously created a dating profile on his behalf, and it started screening matches and uploading photos, all without him instructing it to, essentially. And he said the profile didn't really represent who he actually was. Then there's a separate case, found profile photos of a Malaysian model who had never used the app being used without her knowledge. So it's a governance gap that just doesn't affect OpenClaw. And it applies to any autonomous agent framework right now where broad permissions meet unclear intent. But OpenClaw is the one it happened on publicly, and that matters for the adoption. Now, there has been a response, VirusTotal, scanning for ClawHub uploads, community flagging, audit commands, and NVIDIA is building an enterprise-hardened version called NemoClaw with network guardrails. But still, the trust model's still catching up, and a lot of developers decided not to wait. And that brings us to Hermes Agent. So the whole bet here is on the learning loop component. And it's actually worth understanding how it works because it is different from what you might expect. After Hermes completes any task involving 5 or more tool calls, it enters what's called a reflective phase. Now, this analyzes essentially what just happened, right? What did I just do? It figures out what components of that process are worth keeping, what outputs are worth keeping, and then from there it writes a skill file. Now, of course, we know what a skill file is. It's a structured markdown document capturing the approach taken during those tasks, the edge cases, and as well as the verification steps to make sure that there's those extra security hedges are in place. So next time something similar comes up, it loads that skill instead of having to reason completely from scratch. In one example, a developer who ran, try that again. In one example, a developer who ran it for 6 weeks found his instance had auto-generated 43 of these skills without him asking for a single one. And there's an autonomous background process called the curator that runs weekly, grading and rewriting underperforming skill files on its own. The memory system is built on 3 layers. There's short-term session memory, there's episodic memory, and then there are the procedural skills. The episodic retrieval has a median latency of around 10 milliseconds over 10,000 entries, so it's pretty fast. And Nous Research's internal benchmarks show agents with 20 or more self-created skills completing similar feature tasks 40% faster than a fresh instance. Hermes runs on a $5 VPS. The install is a 1-line curl command, and the version 0.13.0 release that just shipped has 864 commits, 295 contributors in just one single week. It added Google Chat as the 20th messaging platform, a durable multi-agent task management with a hallucination gate, and closed 8 high-priority security issues. So the migration tool that lets OpenClaw users import their settings and memories and API keys directly into Hermes is a pretty clear signal about who they think their user base is. Just a little extra anecdote here on the memory component. In this article here on Harlem World, they talk about how the memory system was one of their biggest surprises when starting to use Hermes Agent. I've used tools that claim long-term memory before. Most of them meant a vector database that sometimes retrieves something vaguely relevant. Hermes' approach is different in a way that took me a while to articulate. It doesn't just store facts, it stores how it solved things. When it completes a complex task, it writes a skill document. Next time something similar loads up, it loads that skill and applies it. Over 6 weeks, I've watched it build a library of about 40 skills. So this pattern recognition, this pattern tracking is something that I've been trying to do for a while in Claude Code, and I've done it to a pretty good degree, making sure that I'm documenting everything I'm doing in Markdown files and all that. But to have it built into the system like this in Hermes Agent is pretty nice. It seems like a really good way to document processes without having to put much effort into it, which is great. So who's the winner in all this? Well, OpenClaw still leads on the cumulative scale. And if you're already running it and you're happy, that's a great place to be. Don't change anything. But Hermes just took the daily lead for the first time, so it's worth talking about, right? And this is only 90 days from its initial launch. And the developers who have been driving home the point that an agent which compounds its own knowledge over time is worth more than one who connects to everything on day one, that bet is starting to pay off. So the question going into the coming months is, will OpenClaw have a response to this? And that remains to be seen. As always, if you found this useful, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and we'll see you next time. Peace.